Hello everyone and welcome back to a off-season recap. It's not a weekly recap. We're only going to have one of these happen, once a month. Yo, big one-person raid. Thank you very much. But yeah, I thought obviously a lot has happened in this off-season. It's been one of the craziest off-season we've ever had in the Overwatch League. I've been away for the last couple of weeks in Australia. I've been keeping track of it, and I've just recently made sure I've caught up to date with absolutely everything. So the date is the 23rd of November, and that's important because so much stuff happens all the time that you need to know when this video was recorded. So what I'm going to do is, first of all, we're going to talk about my thoughts on the NetEase deal and how that is going to affect Chinese Overwatch, how that affects the Overwatch League. And then we're going to talk about everything that has happened so far with all the teams individually as it happens and everything that's happened so far in the offseason. Then we're going to, talk about why we think that the players have all moved on and all that kind of stuff. And then I'm going to talk about the spreadsheet of teams, what I think some of the teams will look like for next year, because there are very few teams, surprisingly, that actively still have a roster or a roster that at least has some form of direction. Honestly, you can probably count it in one hand how many teams have a direction. There are a bunch of teams that have no players, some teams that have no players and no coaches, so we don't really have any idea what's going to happen there. So let's start it all off with the NetEase deal, because if you aren't aware of what happened is about a week ago, maybe a little bit less, NetEase and Activision Blizzard announced that their deal that they have, which is NetEase would run a lot of the Activision Blizzard servers and sort of allow Activision Blizzard games to run in China. That deal ended up coming to a close and they couldn't renegotiate for it to continue. So any Activision Blizzard games that exist within China will be shut down at the end of January 2023. So that is games like World of Warcraft, Overwatch, all that type of stuff, everything except for Diablo Immortal for a different reason. But obviously that has a waking impact in the Overwatch community because Overwatch is a big game in China as a whole. We don't know if this is going to change. This is just posturing, renegotiation tactics, anything like that. We don't know if there is another person who could come in to sort of swipe that deal. I don't know the details personally offhand very well. Sideshow actually did a very good video. We all love Sideshow. He made a great video on his YouTube account. Go check that out if you want to get more nitty gritty into the finer details of this. But I just sort of wanted to bring that up and sort of explain that to you because how it affects the Overwatch League as a whole. Because we have 4 Chinese Overwatch League teams, right, chat? And then 5 as we have LA Valiant becoming an honorary Chinese team with everything that's happened there. So how is this going to affect the Overwatch League in that manner? We've had a couple of pretty crazy moments in this offseason that sort of have given us a basic idea. So Shanghai Dragons is actually owned by NetEase as far as I'm aware. So that team has actually completely blown up, especially at the end of today where we just had announced that Moon would be dropped from the Shanghai Dragons. So before it was just a lot of players and they still retained Lip and Izayaki and they had head coach Moon. So we're thinking maybe they'll just rebuild around those people. But with the dropping of Moon and Lip posting eyes on Twitter, a lot of us are starting to wonder what the Shanghai Dragons team is going to look like. There's even some questions of, is APAC going to exist in the same format that it did this year? Because there's 5 out of the 7 teams that exist in APAC that have a lot of question marks around them. They might not even be able to play Overwatch in China, so they might have to move to Korea. Obviously, it's a massive headache for everything. So what it will look like, we don't know. I don't know. We genuinely are just sort of wading through the dark. For these reasons of everything that's happened with this deal, the off-season has actually been extended and the amount of time before you can start signing free agent players got extended till December 2nd. At this point, teams were supposed to be able to start signing players. Those deals were supposed to be solidified and announced, but it has not happened yet because of this. We won't really have a good gauge of what's happening until that time. Obviously in the West, there's a lot of stuff going on as well, but in the East is really where a lot of us have a lot of questions. We'll see what ends up happening with that as a whole, but for now, this is where we stand. everything, regardless of that NetEase deal and, the Eastern region, there has been a ridiculous amount of free agent signings that have come through. Almost every roster within the Overwatch League has dropped a large percentage of their players and done a complete rebuild. There's been some speculation of what would cause this. There's a lot of people that, because of the way that the Overwatch League has been going over the last couple of years with reduced sponsors, the investment not really being there, salaries at 2020 and, out of 2019, going through 2020 into 2021 were at a ridiculous level. And I think the result of this year's mass exodus of players from teams is probably the team side not able to justify the position of some of the amount of money these players were being paid. We even saw some teams like the Toronto Defiant massively investing in this year of the Overwatch League and then not really seeing any sort of form of return. And that's why they're another team that has dropped a large percentage of their roster. So probably you're going to see a reduced salary for all players across the board going into this season. But I don't think that's always a bad thing. It could be a good, healthy normalization for the league to sort of make it more sustainable, because it was getting a little out of hand for how much viewership and everything that the Overwatch League was having. Obviously, we just had one of the best players we've ever had. Viewership is growing crazy. Overwatch 2 is doing well as a game. So that is a good sign. But it is probably better that we still have this sort of, realignment for teams and players' salaries. Hopefully that works better in the long run. So that's sort of why we've seen so many mix-ups. So now let's talk about the mix-ups that have actually happened. We want to give a quick shout out to Ms. Liz, who works at .esports. She has a great website that if you go to .esports and you go to Offseason Tracker, you check out Ms. Liz's article. She has this all in a format of an article. If you want to just keep an eye on it, she updates it very frequently. But I have gotten, a handle on it, and I've been able to use it to sort of walk you through each of the teams, and we can sort of talk about everything that has happened thus far. So let's start with the Atlanta Reign. Atlanta Reign released OG, Ultraviolet, Nero, Speedily, Venom, and Gator. And Sephi even retired from this team as well 10 days later. So the only players that remained were Kai, Vigilante, and Hawk. But actually just recently, just of today, Kai was dropped from that roster as well. So it's only Hawk and Vigilante that exist on this roster. But more interestingly, yesterday they announced that Gator would be the head coach of the Atlanta Reign, which is obviously gone back and forth between a lot of people. At first we thought, is this a joke? Is this serious? I actually think it's not a bad move from the Atlanta Reign. Gator is a charismatic, great guy who understands the game at a very high level, and he will be able to work with the players well if he's on the right team. Atlanta Reign as a whole, well, I guess it doesn't really have a whole right now, has existed as a player-run team, and if you have a good head coach like Gator, he could easily run a team like that and be a massive bit of value for that team, because he understands the game, he understands the players, the egos, he has a personal relationship with these players as well. So it could go a long way. So I'm excited to see what is going to happen there. And with all of the things that have happened, in the offseason with rumors, it is rumored that American Tornado could be having a reunion. And I would say Atlanta Reign is close to one of those teams at the top of the list where a lot of those players could go. And what that team would really look like is kind of like a Hydron, Speedily, Sam, Kaluge, Reiner, OG, Ultraviolet kind of lineup, which would be a banging Western lineup. Obviously, Vigilante's still in this right. Like, it doesn't make sense for Hawk and Vigilante, but we don't know what they're doing with these existing players right now. We'll see. I think having a Western roster would be the best case scenario for a new coach like Gator. I think he has a lot of relationships with those players, and it would be cool. But only time will really tell. Why do you think Speedily specifically was released? I'm not sure if he was released from contract or his option wasn't picked up. And I think this is actually an important thing to bring up in this video. There is an important thing when you're talking about why some players have entered free agency. There are some players that their contracts just expired, so their contract is over, so they have complete freedom to look at any team they want. There are some players who exist in a unrestricted free agency. What that means is they are still technically signed to their team, but their team has allowed them to go look at other teams, and that other team would have to purchase them with their buyout, with their contract from that team. An unrestricted free agent is essentially what a lot of players have become, where their contract has expired, they are a free agent, and they can just sort of look around and they can get bought by anyone without having to pay that buyout. So you need to keep that in mind of someone like Speedily. His contract could have just ended up running out. He could have only been signed to a 1-year contract, so therefore they didn't have the freedom to just sort of guaranteed sign him for the next year. I can't remember exactly what that happened with Atlanta Reign. There have been a lot of teams that have sort of been posting graphics that sort of explain what that means for their players, of players contract expired or contract extension, option picked up, option not picked up, and all that kind of stuff. So it goes back and forth, but there's a lot of intricacies that go why certain players may have been dropped or not dropped and stuff like that. So here we go in, and we can keep going through the teams. Boston Uprising, we don't really need to talk about all these individual things. Boston Uprising is one of the few teams that does not have any players or coaches. They have since dropped all of their players. They did sign Pre as the general manager. Actually, is Askoft, no. Do they have a head coach at this point? Is Baroy the head coach? No, I don't believe so. I don't know if they got if that's before this. I think it's only Pre right now. Yeah, I think it's just Pre as the general manager. GM of Titans. Sorry, that's who I'm mixing up. So they don't have any coaches either. It is just Pre as the general manager of this team. Pre has said that he wants to sign a head coach before he starts signing any players, but they currently do not have anything as of now. If you're unaware of who Pre is, he was the old GM of the Washington Justice that put together the Washington Justice roster, and he did put together a good roster. It just never really came to success. What will he be able to do with the Boston Uprising? Then we go on to the Chengdu Hunters. Chengdu Hunters are in the same position this offseason as they are in every season of the Overwatch League. We're in the Chengdu zone, and we don't know what is happening. We are just lost. We are confused. It is dark. It is lonely. What is going to happen? This is a team that was supposed to have a successful year this year, but ended up running into financial issues with their parent company, ended up selling a bunch of big pieces, important pieces, that ended up just sort of hurting their season, and they ended up being quite average. We haven't heard anything from this team yet. Obviously, going back to the Chinese, NetEase deal, we don't know what's really happening with a lot of these Chinese teams. As a Western audience, we don't really get a lot of information coming out of that region either. So we're just sort of in the dark at this point with the Chengdu Hunters. Dallas Fuel, all players, and this is the surprising, the Dallas Fuel, the 2022 Overwatch League champions, let all of their players into unrestricted free agency, which I believe for all of their players is, I think they had the option to re-sign them, but I believe they didn't pick up that option. Someone in chat confirm with me if I'm wrong about that, but I think that I don't think that they all fell out of contract at the same time. I think they just made the choice to enter them all into unrestricted free agents. And this includes Rush. Rush is also, no, I believe Rush might be a restricted free agent. Let me just double check this for you guys. And we'll pull it up real quick. Rush is a restricted free agent. So he is still signed to the Dallas Fuel, but he is able to be shopped to other teams, potentially if anyone wants him and wants to buy him out. But he even said, "I'm very sorry for the situation where I can't be with my players." So as a whole, Dallas Fuel has made this big leap, and Hastro actually tweeted about it. They said that they want to keep their team, but they want to give the option for that team to look elsewhere, and they want to be able to rework negotiations. So they've essentially just dropped everyone as a player. Some players expired, some players they didn't pick up their options, but they've retained Rush. I will say Dallas Fuel, I've heard from a lot of players and other people say that they have a lot of loyalty to Rush. So I think if Dallas Fuel were to re-sign Rush and just sort of keep him, I think a lot of those players would come back. What that Dallas Fuel team would look like is very interesting. All right, wait, we got breaking news from Atlanta Reign. Oh, that is interesting. off the press, Atlanta Reign have signed Stalker, which does not go the direction I think it was going to go. So that sort of definitely breaks up the idea that America Tornado could end up at the Atlanta Reign. Makes you think that it is definitely most likely to be a mixed roster. I didn't think they could sign anyone yet as well, but I think maybe because this is a trade, it doesn't make sense. Why? Because it's a trade, it doesn't fall under those lines. He was under contract with the Seoul Dynasty. So I don't know how that works. Screw it. It's interesting. Stalker was a great player for the Seoul Dynasty. I think that is potentially one of the last players that exists on Seoul Dynasty. We'll talk about them in just a second. I think it was only Stalker and Prophet who retained on that team. But Stalker was a great player for Atlanta. Every time he came into play over Prophet or Fitz, he did a great job. So that's a great signing for Atlanta. But almost certainly leans into the fact that they will be a mixed roster at the Atlanta Reign next year, which will be interesting to see how they manage that. But that's it. That's a cool signing. That's a cool signing. So that's Atlanta Reign right now. So the people for tally of where we are right now, currently on the Atlanta Reign, they have Hawk as a tank, they have Vigilante, and now they have Stalker. So maybe trade a Vigilante for Stalker. They would have said that. Maybe you guys keep an eye on Seoul Dynasty, but I don't think Seoul is trying to buy players. I think Seoul's trying to get rid of all their players. If they're willing to drop Smurf, I don't think they're trying to sign a roster right now. So I would be surprised if they took Vigilante for him. But never say never. We'll see. We'll see. But yeah, that's where Dallas Fuel is at right now. So Dallas Fuel have no players, but they do have Coach Rush under contract, but he is looking for other teams. Florida Mayhem has released Exy, Hydron, Animo, Surmaged, and Day 1. Albert Yeh confirms that someone, RuPaul, and Checkmate are re-signed for 2023. So Florida Mayhem are one of the few teams that still have retained a couple of players. I think someone, RuPaul, and Checkmate played very well from this year. I think you build around someone as a player as a whole. We haven't heard anything to do with their coaching staff of Goomba or McGravy if they're going to remain coaches for this roster. But, you know, only we will see what ends up happening with that team. But I think it's a good thing to build around. It doesn't seem like they're going to be a super team or they're going to change their ideology about how they build teams. They're going to build the best roster with with the littlest amount of money as they can. But there are some good pieces here. Exy actually announced that he's going to Valorant. He's retiring from Overwatch and going to Valorant. Hydron, we haven't heard anything about. He hasn't even posted an LFT, but I would assume he is LFT. Animo and Surmaged both posted LFTs and are available to be picked up. So that's sort of where the Florida Mayhem is at right now. Guangzhou Charge, we haven't heard anything from this team in the same way of Chengdu Hunters. The only thing is that Krong announced that he is retiring from Overwatch. Obviously a great player in 2020. A lot of people had him as a Rookie of the Year candidate. But since then, he hasn't really offered much. 2021 was a disappointing season. And this year, just not able to really get anything going. So Krong is gone from the Overwatch League, which is sad to see. Hangzhou Spark have made some interesting choices as well. They have dropped head coach Changun. We will miss you. And they dropped Miro and Neko as well. But they also dropped Architect Bernard and Teru. So that's not that surprising. I think Bernard had some good moments, but I think if you are to retain players currently on their roster, they still have Alpha Yi, Pineapple, and Shy. Then they have Gushue as tank, and they retained Super Rich and Irony. And I think they have one other player. Oh no, I was thinking of Neko. Am I missing someone that they still have on their roster? I'm not sure, but that is essentially where the Hangzhou Spark are at right now. So they haven't really talked too much, but these are the players that they don't have, and they don't have a coaching staff right now, but another team that we're kind of in the dark about with the Chinese Overwatch going on right now. So the Houston Outlaws. Houston Outlaws released Doge, Lep, and Creative. So a lot of the pieces that they signed later in the season that ended up having some success. You know, Creative was great in the playoffs. Lep was really good in the Jotes meta in the Summer Showdown. They ended up dropping these players. They were kind of emergency signings. Disappointing we didn't get to see anything really out of Doge. Sorry. We saw him for one series, and then he got subbed out in the last map. And after that, we haven't seen him. It's not surprising. Dante was playing incredibly well in the tank, but, you know, it's always sucks when you see a player get signed, but not really be able to show what they have. They also parted ways with Coach Ho Chi Lee. I don't really know much about him as a coach. I've heard, obviously, the players have good things to say about him, but, you know, that only takes you so far in terms of perspective. So, Outlaws have Dante, Lastro, and then Pelican Merit on their roster. Something that we did find out today, though, is that Merit actually removed all branding from his Twitter. Let's have a look at this, because it doesn't look great. Oh, God. That's not great. Overwatch. Merit Overwatch. Oh, God. Is that really not going to pull me to Merit? Oh, God. All right, 1 second. Merit Overwatch. Twitter. You might have to do that. All right. Oh, it has a 1 in it. That's why. But yeah, Merit removed all Houston Outlaws branding from his Twitter, which usually is a bad sign as a player when they remove your branding. It says player for blank. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with Merit. It's important to remember the drama that happened with Pelican when Piggy left. When Piggy left, got dropped from that team, went to the Guangzhou Charge. Pelican made a tweet that says, "Wait for me, I will come back to play with you." So that was before they came third in the Overwatch League and had that ridiculous run through the playoffs. So maybe things have changed, but I don't think everything's peachy clean right now at the Houston Outlaws. So we'll see what ends up happening with this team, but they still have a bunch of great players on that team, and I think if they can retain a bunch of those, like Merit Pelican is an incredible DPS doer. You can't doubt that at all. London Spitfire. London Spitfire parted ways with Poco, Shax, and Khan. Essentially, they're 3 bench players that were useful to have, but didn't really get a whole lot of playtime throughout the year. Sparker is a free agent. He's actually out of contract because I think he was probably on like a 1+1. Remember, he played at the very end of 2021, sorry, and then he played in 2022. So he's probably out of contract is why he's here, which I think they're hoping to re-sign him, but he's available to look for other teams. Admiral, Landon, Hardy, and Backbone have all been retained for 2023. And Christopher, I believe, is still the head coach of that team. So the London Spitfire is one of the few teams that have pretty much stayed the same going into next year for what we expect at this point. So, I would also be very surprised if Sparker didn't re-sign with this roster. It seems like he's really happy there. He's been performing well. I'd be surprised if he wanted to go to a different team unless he gets a great offer. The Los Angeles Gladiators had a very interesting one. They updated their fans on their thing. Kevster and Funny Astro were the only players retained for 2023. The remainder of the teams is still in talks with them, but are technically free agents. Interestingly enough, with this announcement, the 2 ones that stand out the most is Space and Happy. They had a team option that could have been picked up, but they were actually declined. So essentially, the LA Gladiators had the option to extend their contract, and they didn't. Part of this could go in line with what we were talking about of maybe Space and Happy had very high contracts that Gladiators didn't want to pay, so they could easily renegotiate for a cheaper price if that is what they want to do. But essentially, they had the option to keep them if they were willing to pay for it, and they didn't. The big ones, obviously, is sort of Reiner. His contract is expired, and Shu's contract is expired as well. So both of these players go into free agency. Primarily Shu. I think there's going to be a big bidding war on who wants to get Shu. Will we see Shu go back to the Gladiators, or could he go to a different team? I'm excited to see what happens with that. He's definitely one of the big pickups that you should keep an eye on going into this offseason. I believe Gladiators have retained both of their coaches as well. Los Angeles Valiant doesn't have a team, doesn't have a coach. I actually brought up this story recently that after the Ballsack Esports tweeted and made a joke about me becoming and buying the Los Angeles Valiant franchise. The GM of the Los Angeles Valiant right now, a Chinese guy who runs the team, actually messaged me and was like, hey, just checking. This was actually a joke, right? And you're not actually the new owner of the LA Valiant. That really happened. So that's sort of the state that the LA Valiant is in right now. I don't think they have any idea what's going on. So they are very lost. I do not own the Los Angeles Valiant. Let's just put that out there. And hopefully we can see this team go back to some semblance of, respect in the league, because what they've been doing over the last couple of years has just obviously not been great. All right. New York Excelsior. New York Excelsior is another team which have no coaches and no players. We don't really have any idea of the direction the New York Excelsior is going. Could they go back to the APAC region? Don't know. This is a team that has always invested at least somewhat in the league. They put a reasonable investment in last year. This is a pretty good roster. You got Yaki, Flora, Kellen was a big rookie heading in. But it just didn't work. It went incredibly poorly. So we'll see if the team decides to change direction. Maybe they go North American roster. We'll see. Paris Eternal is an interesting one because Paris Eternal released head coach J-Mac. They also released Wub and Croy. But they actually, as far as we're aware, has retained 4 of their players. They kept Rack Attack, they kept Mouthful, they kept Dove, and they kept... oh my god, why do I always forget? Who's the last player I'm thinking? God, someone help me here. Luke Mino. I always forget Luke Mino. I don't know why. And Luke Mino. So I'm not surprised about Luke Mino and Rack Attack. I think they are both a solid backline for the most part, in my opinion. But I'm surprised that, they're willing to commit to so many players of that roster that really struggled last year. So obviously this franchise is becoming the Vegas Eternal. They confirmed that in the middle of this year. So we'll see what they end up doing. But I'm a little worried if they sort of keep a lot of these pieces, because I don't know how much they're going to be able to keep up with everyone else. Maybe with a solid offseason and a good opportunity to prove themselves and not just getting shoehorned in the middle of a season, they can perform better. I think we would all love to see that. But I think it is an absolute gamble by Vegas Eternal to go in again. If they get a great coaching staff in a similar way that the London Spitfire did and sort of able to rebuild, I think we'd all be down for that. But, they haven't really shown us that right now. Philadelphia Fusion. Philadelphia Fusion have released 5 players: Bellis Rhea, Fury, Carpe, Fixer, and AimGod. Carpe signed with T1 Valorant. That was already rumored going into the playoffs, so he has officially been signed. MN3 and Zest were re-signed to the Fusion. Those are the only 2 players that they currently have on their roster. And they actually confirmed their coaches as well. J1N, Jin, and Sungmin and Chara will be returning. So the coaching staff is saying, along with MN3 and Zest. I think we can all agree it's the right choice. I think if I was the GM of that team, I think I would have done the exact same thing. I don't know much about the coaches, but MN3 and Zest, by far the 2 best rookies they have. If they can fill out a good backline, a good tank role, they could be contenders going into next year, especially with the uncertainty of the APAC region. But I think their backline and their tank line just really struggled this year. San Francisco Shock. San Francisco Shock released Kaluj, Mikey, Sam, and Striker. So all of their Western players, plus Striker, who was that last second playoff signing, who did great work for them, have all gone. So I don't think anyone's surprised by this. So they currently have all their Korean players. So they have Proper. They actually released Kilo at a later date. So Kilo is actually no longer with this roster as well. So it is just Proper, Violet, and Finn right now on this roster as far as I'm aware. And they actually parted way with their assistant coach, Kasaurus. So they still have, oh my God, Krusty. They still have Krusty as head coach. But Kasaurus has actually parted ways and is now the head coach of Toronto Defiant, which will be really exciting to see what he does with that team. But we'll talk about them in a second. So there is and 9K. Thank you. That's a good catch as well. So they still have the bones of their coaching staff. They're still a great team, but who are they going to use to build around that? Obviously, when we talk about a lot of the upcoming prospects out of contenders, the main ones you think of are from O2 Blast, which is like Max, Heesang, and we were talking about it earlier in this stream. If we get Proper and then potentially Lip, if Lip is a free agency and the Shanghai Dragons are falling apart, if you got Proper, Lip, Heesang, Max, and then you get Smurf alongside that, if they're willing to throw the bag, then you have Finn and Violet. Oh yeah, that's a pretty good team as a whole. Like, that would be by far the leading candidate, even if the Dallas Fuel retained a lot of their players. So that would be ridiculous. We don't really know how the signing works because O2 Blast is essentially the academy team of the San Francisco Shock. I don't know how that works with Shock having first dibs at those players. Not really sure if that's changed at all. But regardless, I think a lot of those O2 Blast players would love to go to the San Francisco Shock. They have some of the best coaches that have ever been in the league. They have Proper, who's the MVP and Rookie of the Year in the league. They have a great team. And if they're like, hey, if you come to our team, we're a super team. We have the best chance to win the league. That's where every player is going to want to go. So we'll see what ends up happening with this team. But, time will tell. San Francisco Shock is definitely in the best spot as of right now in this offseason. Now let's talk about teams that aren't in the best spot, coming from a good place. Seoul Dynasty. Seoul Dynasty have released Fitz, Smurf, Vindame, and Iris. It's pretty shocking. Obviously, they just lost Stalker in this Atlanta Reign trade. We don't know if they're getting anything back for that or if that was just a straight buyout. But essentially, the only player still remaining on the team is Prophet. And Prophet, even himself, released a restricted free agency tweet pretty recently, if I remember correctly. I'm under contract with Seoul Dynasty, but the team allowed me to explore options. Restricted free agent. So that's not surprising. Seoul aren't just going to drop Prophet. They're aware that someone's probably going to want to buy out his contract if they are planning on trading him effectively. But we will see what happens with this team. There was actually a tweet. Actually, I think it's worth bringing this one up as well. Arnold actually had a tweet about the Seoul Dynasty. Let me see if I can find it real quick. Here it is. So Arnold actually tweeted, for Seoul Dynasty, with the current uncertainty in the APAC region, we've decided to take a step back while we assess the situation and allow the majority of the team to explore free agency. I can't say enough about how great our players are, and we hope for a speedy resolution. And, this is another big red flag of what is happening in the APAC region when you have one of the best teams and just sort of one of the most ingrained teams in the Overwatch League dropping one of the best rosters. They dropped Vindame, who is an incredible rookie. They dropped Smurf, who is like a two-time champion, is one of the best Winstons and tank players that we have in the entire league. They were willing to give these players up because of the uncertainty of what's happening in this APAC region. So it's worrying signs for the Seoul Dynasty of what is going to become of this roster if they're just willing to just sort of drop everyone. So we'll see what ends up becoming a Seoul Dynasty. But right now, we don't know. And this is one of the teams that we're sort of like keeping a close eye on to sort of get a vibe check of, are they going to start re-signing some of their players or other players? And are they going to continue to invest in the Overwatch League and their team? Shanghai Dragons are in a similar boat. Another team that has been ingrained in the league since the beginning of time. They were our 2021 champions of the Overwatch League. They were incredible in 2020. They've been investing a ton in the last 3 years, but they parted ways with Pavilion and Damon, their assistant coaches, and just today announced that Moon is released as head coach as well. And, Moon had a pretty harrowing tweet as well. Let me pull that up. Who said, after discussing with the team, I became a free agent. Today is a very sad day, and I'm just sad about this situation. So he's LFT, and he doesn't seem to have good words to say about it. So very sad situation. We're getting worried about what's going on in this region. They have since dropped all of their players except for Lip and Izayaki. Lee Jae-gon was one of the players who were retained at the beginning after they dropped all their other players. But Lee Jae-gon since got dropped and is LFT. So he is completely released. Lip and Izayaki are restricted free agents, I believe. They both said that they're willing to, they are looking at other options, but they are retained to the team. Lip has posted an eyes emoji. And he's sort of been in the community. You know, we've seen many screenshots of Lip sort of talking. I think it is very likely that we expect to see Lip on a team that isn't the Shanghai Dragons, where he has spent his entire career, which is crazy because Lip is one of the best hit scans in the world. If you don't agree with me, you're just wrong. Lip is absolutely incredible, and if he is able to go to any team, people will be looking at him. You look at both currently the San Francisco Shock and that Dallasville roster, both of them would go crazy at the opportunity to be able to pick up Lip as a player. So I'm curious to see where that ends up, where Lip ends up, if he does go to potentially one of these Western super teams that are fully Korean, and he could be integrated quite well. So we'll see what ends up happening, but Shanghai Dragons is another team in shambles with this APAC region stuff. So we'll see. Toronto Defiant has released their entire roster. Toronto Defiant currently has nothing. They released their head coaches and their players, but they have since added Casaurus as their head coach. So Casaurus, who was an assistant coach under in the San Francisco Shock, has stepped away and is now a head coach. It's his first ever head coach gig. I wish him the best of luck. Good luck with what he does with Toronto Defiant. Toronto Defiant is another one of the options that were, if there was going to be an American Tornado unity and they come back as a whole roster, Toronto Defiant is a great option for that. Western team, they have Casaurus as a great coach who has a lot of experience of working with championship caliber teams. All of those American Tornado players are free agents. They are probably the best options to be picked. Like literally all of those players are pretty free. So that is a very much likely option for that. So we'll see what ends up happening with this team. But the other team that it could happen with is the Vancouver Titans. Vancouver Titans has dropped Deepay, their head coach, and they dropped every single player that they have except for Aspire. Which is not surprising. Aspire is absolutely incredible. He should be their franchise player. If they are going to retain him, can they build a roster around him? I believe Baroy is the new GM of that team. I don't believe they have a coach at this time. So what are they going to do? All these American Tornado players could come to play with Aspire. We'll see. But there is nothing really happening for the Vancouver Titans. I hope we get to see this franchise get back to where they were in 2019 when they were just an incredible roster. And Washington Justice, a team that has nothing on their roster. They do not have any players. They do not have any coaches. I don't even think they have a GM, actually. Let me Washington Justice this up. Let's have a look at this one. Yeah, they do not have a GM at this time. They currently have no team, no players, no coaches, no GM. So we don't really know if what Washington Justice is doing, if they are going to sign, a Western team, a mixed team, a Korean team. Obviously, they went all Korean and it didn't really work for them. So we'll see. And this is a worrying sign, if you are an Overwatch League fan, of the current format that we exist in, is that there are so many teams that literally just have nothing to show for a roster. Which obviously we're at the very beginning of the offseason. There's probably going to be signings coming hard left and right. People are announcing all that kind of stuff. But like teams that don't even have GMs is where you have to worry. So we'll see. Hopefully we can get a look at what these teams look like soon. And remember, the signing window where teams can start signing free agent players is December 2nd. So we got another about 10 days until that happens. Here's a crappy little spreadsheet that I put together yesterday. And let me add Stalker to this list. Just so you can sort of get a visual representation of like what all the teams look like right now. Hey, Bo. This is what all the teams look like right now of the players that they have. As you can tell, it's very bare right now. And we sort of did some spitballing as well. So Atlanta Reign have Hawk, Vigilante, and Stalker with Gator as a head coach. Dallas Fuel have no one. Vancouver Titans only have Aspire. San Francisco Shock is, we were sort of spitballing this like crazy team that you could get. There's actually a fun fact as well that we were looking at. Birdring is actually a free agent. If you missed this, Birdring is actually a free agent in Overwatch. He said that he would like to play in the league. Is anyone going to take a gamble on Birdring? We know how talented of a player he is. He hasn't played in a year. What will happen there? Boston has no one. London Spitfire, this is the team that we talked about. They retained the bones of their team. This is the Vegas Eternal. This is what they have. Dove, Malthus, Rack Attack, and Luke Mino. How are they going to bolster this roster to make it great? With so many good free agents, they can pick up so many good players. Cast the Funny Astro at the Glads. Checkmate someone. RuPaul at Florida Mayhem. So this is probably going to be another hodgepodge team of like, I think Goomba will probably just put on his like scouting hat and try and moneyball it like he did this year. Yeah, Huxell and Bumper are also free agents for whatever that means. But yeah. Then we have Houston Outlaws, Dante, Merritt, Pelican, Lastro. This is a good core to build around, but as we said, there's dissent, with Pelican earlier in the season, Merritt removing all Houston branding from himself. And like, do you gamble? We had this conversation on my stream yesterday. Do you gamble on Dante tank? Do you just rely on Dante and just assume that he's going to be able to keep this momentum going and stay at the top tier? Or do you sign a more storied and veteran tank for a team like the Houston Outlaws that if you have these players are fighting for a championship? Obviously Dante would be great on most teams, but can he win you a championship as tank? Maybe. But that is a big question mark in my eyes. Toronto Defiant and New York Excelsior have nothing. LA Valiant is barely even a team. Zest and MN3 remaining on Philadelphia Fusion. Seoul Dynasty lost Stalker and have Profit as a restricted free agent. Hongzhou Super Rich, Irony, Gooshway, Alpha U, Pineapple, Shy. This is a team that they got, which is pretty good bones, but we haven't really heard much. Haven't heard anything out of Guangzhou. Shanghai only has Izayaki and Lip, and then Chengdu is in the Chengdu zone. That's where we're at. That's the off-season right now, chat. I hope this video can sort of catch you up on the off-season if you've missed anything. Just sort of a quick recap over everything we know so far and where we're going. I don't know when my next video is going to be. It'll probably be after December 2nd when we start getting some signings. We can start talking about things and we have a better idea of what these teams are going to look like, where the players are going to end up, and hopefully a definitive answer of what's going on in the APAC region and how that's going to affect the league as a whole. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you guys found it insightful. Let me know what you guys think. Which team do you think is going to be good? Where do you think American Tornado players are going to go? Do you think the APAC region is going to even exist next year? Let me know. Love you all. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you guys next time.